Hi, my name's Nathan Rose. I'm a naturopath. I work at Health World up in Brisbane. We make supplements. But I'm here today to talk about exercise. So often researchers and presenters talk about if they've got conflict of interest. I have no commercial interest in getting you to exercise or your child. Just state that up front. That was a fascinating previous discussion about exercise. I won't get too bogged down in the mechanisms and science, but just want to take you a bit more of an overview of exercise and how it can be an adjunct to everything else you're doing for yourselves and your children in your lives. So hopefully you can walk away after this feeling that exercise is critically important as anything else you're doing, whether it's diet, supplements, and these remedial specific therapies. And I'm going to focus specifically on brain function, but we're going to touch upon other aspects as well. And how's this? Oop, just get my clickers right. Oh, yep. So, as I said, I'm a naturopath, and as a practitioner, sorry, just get myself sorted. You look at the research, and there's different theories on childhood illnesses and so forth, and there's genes, and there's bugs, and there's nutrient deficiencies. Lack of sunshine is emerging as a big thing, and mercury toxicity, and often they're looking for what's different, because we all know that children's health issues have really skyrocketed in the past 20 years or so, and even our own conditions in adults. And we're in the research always looking for discordance between what was good then and what's happening now. And yeah, they've highlighted all these genes, as I said, and gut pathogens for autism, and nutritional deficiencies, and they're all valid, all important. But what I want to really emphasise this afternoon is that a lack of activity is one of the biggest. My timing's good. One of the biggest discordances we're seeing today in our children, and no doubt in ourselves. I experience it myself, being sedentary all day at work, and it's very difficult to just get normal amounts of activity. I'd hate to wear those Fitbit things because I'd be depressed, I think, at how little I'm doing. So there was a recent study where in Australia they looked at children's activity levels, and they've got their minimum requirements of an hour a day, and they found that 80% of children didn't meet the minimum requirement of physical activity a day, and I'm sure it parallels with adults. So in my view, and I'll show you the reasons why. I mean, exercise and physical activity, simply you might think is just a insignificant or soft sort of correlation, but I'll show you the mechanisms behind it, and I think it's just as important to consider exercise as we do with our supplements and everything else. So they got these report cards. I can't really use my laser beam, but anyway. And they correlated with 19 other countries throughout the world, and what they found, they ranked it, gave them a scorecard, and they found Australia was equal second worst to all the other 19 other countries. I think only Scotland, up the top there, fared worse. So they looked at organised sports and infrastructure, commuting and so forth, and Australia got a D-. So that's pretty disappointing, and they discussed in the paper that we've got the world's best infrastructure and parks and pavements, and our organised sport is world class, but yet we're still not doing enough activity. So we're going to look at how we can do that today. Obviously, I'm talking about children, but this can extend to ourselves as well. One of the interesting things is, as a naturopath, we're always looking at diets, and this diet and paleo and clean eating and low carb and low fat and everything, particularly for weight loss. And I'll only touch upon kids' obesity levels, but as a strategy to lose weight, we're always thinking about diet. And what they did a study in Australia again recently, looking at what kids are eating, what activity they're doing, and levels and their body composition. And what they found was diet. Sorry, I'm missing. Am I pushing? Sorry. Diet had absolutely no relevance to kids' bodies compositions, i.e., the kids who were more overweight, they didn't eat any more or anything different to kids who are of normal weight. In fact, the boys who are overweight actually ate less carbohydrates than the healthy weight children. But what they found was that the overweight kids were less active. So, as I said, obviously we've got some special needs and so forth with our children and ourselves. I'm not saying diet's not important, but in terms of children's activity levels, I just really want to underscore that fact that we need to get them moving more, and ourselves. So that's all I'll talk about with weight loss and fat burning and so forth. One of the key messages I want to enforce is that exercise is not just a thermogenic aid, as we call it, not just burning the food you eat. It stimulates a multitude of physiological processes, both for short-term benefits, but even long-term. So I'm not going to test you on all those acronyms and processes and so forth, but just to paint a picture that it's not just we're burning up the fuel we ate. It's stimulating metabolic, hormonal, neurotransmitters, all these in genes expression, all these compounds that help give us beneficial adaptations. So, sounds like a bit of a wonder pill. Just going to touch upon each of these benefits of exercise outside that thermogenic fat burning up top, right, 11 o'clock circle. So exercise has, and Danielle really got into the nitty gritty of it, in movement. When I'm talking about exercise, it's not just to go for a 5 kilometre run. It's, for children particularly, it's just physical activity, locomotion, movement, different sort of motor skills, ball skills. And exercise has a beneficial effect which we'll dub as neurotrophic, as in helping cognitive function, intelligence, memory. It has a direct effect on moods. And then it's got a few indirect effects on other organs and systems in our body that is probably some are novel and unrecognised up until now. So let's, as we're all interested in brain function, let's focus on that. So there's the old stereotype that, if you're athletic, it's the whole, brains or brawn. It's, they're mutually exclusive almost. I think, that's really is literally a stereotype. And looking at the evidence, they find that the kids who have the better motor skills, the better coordination and skill, have the better attention and executive function, decision making, and so forth. This is probably really highlighted in studies on children with ADHD, and you may have seen that their motor skills are pretty average compared to the norm. So there isn't this division of you've got to be sporty and athletic, or you've got to practice piano and wear glasses and have little muscle mass or whatever. So we want to try and merge the two. And this motor skills their levels in Australian kids are really, really alarming their competency. So this is a recent study on children in grade 6, and they were just comparing how competent they were at doing basic locomotive and ball skills, and they found that, as you can see on the graphs, the boys and girls, that they're achieving about 50% competency levels, and their actually levels are declining since 1980. Ironically, when school funding has to be trimmed and grades are declining, it's often the sports activities that has to go. And this is illustrated in a couple local papers. However, this is helping my coordination, doing two at once. But when we look at the studies, they've found the kids who are most active have the greater IQ. So there's a significant relationship between activity levels and IQ. And the authors comment in this paper about how ironically it is they'll cut funding to school sports programs if the grades start declining. So on the flip side, what happens if we introduce some sort of sports and skills, physical skills for children, particularly at needs children like ADHD? There's several studies. I'll just touch upon one. And I really want to underscore the take-home message is, so they got some children with ADHD, and they gave them three groups, put them into three groups. So the EG is activity, but they had two types of activity. One was like ball skills, all sort of skills like balancing, this concept here called slacklining, walking on a tightrope, things to do with dexterity. And the other group got traditional sort of sports like gymnastics and orienteering, swimming, track and field and so forth. So different sort of activity levels. And then there was a control group. And it went for 12 weeks. And at the end, they measured all their tests, the battery of cognitive functions and memory and so forth. And there was basically the significant improvements in the kids giving either group, either activity level protocol. So my point is, this is probably in contrast to Danielle, but my theme is just do something. Whatever you enjoy, just do it and make sure it's physically active. And you can do your remedial stuff on top of that. Similar results in dyslexia. These are children with reading difficulties, and they were given a home-based program. And again, quite enjoyable activities. Things that probably kids do it intuitively. You know, often on your couch and at home on our staircase and off the fan or something like that, and all the hills hoist and things like that. But maybe a bit more safer and less damaging to your goods is balls and wobble boards, all those sort of balancing things. So I did that for 6 months, and there was a control group who did nothing, no extra work. And again, when they measured them at the end, the kids who did the active motor skills had greater improvements in reading and phonetic skills and a whole battery of other parameters. So why is it that being active and mobile helps the brain function? At one level you think that's sort of counterintuitive, like you just want to focus on your muscles and get big and strong and buff and look at the beach. Why is it that it helps your brain? So from one perspective, if we think about locomotion from an evolutionary point of view, is if we had to move rapidly and hurriedly and using balance and things, it was usually some sort of threat to our survival. We wanted to get away, flee from a saber-tooth or something, or you wanted to hunt or catch or forage or so forth. So our bodies are designed to experience stress and make adaptations to become more resilient and to obviously survive and continue these things in the future. So by being physically active, it's stimulating these what we call hormetic pathways, that sort of phrase, that which does not kill me will make me stronger sort of thing, or I suppose from the old 70s, no pain, no gain sort of thing. So just trying to underscore that by getting our children active, it's actually helping our brain function. So to drill into sort of some of the mechanisms, it helps improve blood flow to the brain, sprouts new blood vessels called angiogenesis to supply more oxygen and nutrients. It also helps with neurotransmitters, the feel-good ones like dopamine and serotonin and so forth. But this is probably in line with what Danielle just talked about with this plasticity, is the exercise stimulates the production of peptides or growth factors which help components of your brain grow, particularly the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. That's the real master one for this plasticity that was just mentioned about making kids, particularly kids' brains, they're a bit more dynamic, more malleable and able to respond to these stimuli better. All right, I'm getting old. I've got a couple kids and I'm getting grumpy. One of my pet hates is people taking selfies. Selfies everywhere. They go to a concert and they film it. It's like, you're not going to capture it, just be in the moment. And what they find is they did some research on people doing selfies and capturing everything and having to document it and store it digitally, is that it actually decreases your own retrieval of that memory, and it makes the memory more fuzzier than if you just put the camera away and just sat and watched and absorbed it. There's less sort of emotional content to it. And this is where one of the actions of exercise can help with our memory and putting sort of emotional flavour to it. Okay, hope Danielle doesn't pick me up my brain anatomy, but so in the brain there's this little horseshoe-shaped organ called the hippocampus, and one of its functions is to help store memories and turn sort of emotional content into memories. And what happens is, particularly BDNF, that growth factor stimulates the hippocampus to get bigger. So on the right there with the bar graphs in the black, what they found is they divided children into fit and unfit, and they did some testing and measured their hippocampal size, and the fit kids, you can see they had a markedly greater level of hippocampus. So they shouldn't need all that, their iPhone 6 and their new watch and everything to watch something live. Probably they will. So this has been demonstrated in animal studies where they got mice to run on treadmills and they measured MRI with their hippocampus, and purple means increased growth there on the left, and that's the hippocampus expanding just from the exercise. I'm sure if they had a drug that could do that, it'd be a blockbuster. So this reflects in humans. They made some people run, and they measured their BDNF afterwards, and their brain-derived neurotrophic factor was elevated. They did that for 6 weeks, and they tested their memory, and sure enough, their memory was better than people who, here on the left, didn't do anything, or just did nothing, then went for one run and tested their memory. So prolonged activity, that's that long-term adaptations I was speaking about. It's good to go for a run or do yoga, whatever, and you feel good afterwards. But you can rest assured you're getting some long-term adaptations. So if we're looking at considering children, how likely is it that we're going to get say a 9-year-old, particularly mine, to go for a half an hour steady-state run 3 times a week? Their heart rate at 136.2, and all that sort of stuff. Probably unlikely. But what they've found is even short, sharp bursts can be as effective, or if not more effective, as a steady state. So the new kid on the block in exercise research, and it's even filtering into commercial gyms and so forth, is the high-intensity interval training, HIIT. Yeah. So that's where you're between 10 and maybe 10 seconds to 2 minutes or something, you do all-out work and rest for a couple minutes and then repeat again. So they measured BDNF after that, and they found people doing the HIIT treatment had greater levels of BDNF. Again, how do we translate that to everyday world for ourselves? You can do some sprints when you're running, or cycling sprints. For kids, it can just be anything that can make them essentially puffed out in a short period of time, so sack races and relay races. Time trials, my son likes it. If we go to the park and I make him do an obstacle course and he's got to do it as fast as he can and you time it. Wrestling, trampoline, all that sort of stuff. Anything that just kids naturally sort of tend to do anyway. But hopefully you feel that there's some really sort of brain benefits to that. Okay, so that's a cognitive function. Let's touch upon mood. It's probably been a long day for you all, so hang in there, nearly there. Again, similar to the cognitive function, less active kids have more depressive symptoms than more active kids. So it could be horse or cart, chicken or egg, what do you want to call it? What came first? Are they depressed and therefore they want to go out? Or is it the don't go out and then get depressed? I think it's a latter where they're inactive and it affects their mood. Again, this acronym comes up, BDNF. They're discovering now part of the conventional drug treatment for depression, like the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Actually, part of the benefits they get at results is because it activates this BDNF pathway and helps our hippocampus. So probably, yeah, far better if we got ourselves and our children exercising than taking medication. And I think they've done comparative trials looking at exercise versus antidepressants, and exercise is as effective, if not better, than antidepressant therapy for adults. Particularly good for BDNF is linked with anxiety, and in particular OCD. So I won't go through the numbers and studies, but that's just a summary proving what I'm saying. I'm not making this up. in contrast, if we get OCD people taking their normal treatment plus doing an aerobic-based protocol, we see improvements in their symptoms. So just supporting that BDNF story. So this is all, that was with the adults, but yeah, I expect kids would get similar benefits from exercise therapy. So this is that's pretty exciting, showing people engaged in exercise can be really beneficial. There's an interesting study came out about if, as parents, we get involved physically, literally, with our child and engaging with them. And this, I was really, really pleased with this because as a dad, I get told off for tossing my kids around and swinging them and probably breaking stuff as well, like they do. But this study found what daggy dads can be really happy about is tossing around your kids in a safe and controlled manner is beneficial for the kids' emotional development and social development. So they call it rough and tumble play. They're sort of wrestling and throwing in the air and swinging around and rolling up in blankets and sitting on and all that sort of stuff. They did a trial where they got children and fathers to engage like this, and they again measured all their cognitive function and ticked all surveys and all that sort of stuff, and they found that at the end, the kids had less social problems and increased emotional health. So yeah, maybe it replicates that sort of the cubs and the lions where they grab them by the back and throw them around and everything. It's sort of almost intuitive for fathers. We actually win one there. So hopefully it's a take-home point for dads out there and even mothers. Interacting in another way, getting kids out and interacting is beneficial. So we just looked at the psychosocial aspects. However, there's also benefits with mixing and getting out there with our bacteria that resides in and amongst us. So we're all probably pretty familiar with the importance of like probiotics and fibre and prebiotics, and maybe kids have had stool tests and gut function tests and all that sort of stuff. Getting out there and mixing and mingling and playing with dogs and pets and other kids and rolling in the dirt, that's really good for building up a healthy diversity of all the bugs in your system, particularly your digestive tract. So in childhood illnesses such as autism, they've often got reduced diversity. There's like a monoculture. Think of a rainforest. You want all those organisms and different plants and species all flourishing, working in a symbiotic relationship, compared to, say, a monoculture of just pine trees. That's more of an autistic sort of profile. And what they've found is exercise can, what I'd term is a prebiotic. So along with your gut treatments and your diets and so forth, think of exercise as a prebiotic. So this can help with our brain function, as we know the connection between the gut and the brain. So I want to just delve upon some indirect mechanisms of exercise on our brain function. Getting through it. So there's emerging evidence about this, and they, for example, again, rats, mice on treadmills, and they give them a program, and then they look at their microbiome or their gut flora, and they find a distinct increase in diversity. And the rats that were obese to start with, their gut bugs transition to a lean composition, and there's a pretty lot of interest in the research at the moment about the link between gut bugs and development of obesity and insulin resistance. So exercise is helpful there again. And this BDNF we keep talking about, although derived in the brain, it can actually be synthesized in our intestines and actually helps with the motility of our bowel. So the old, I suppose, grandmother's advice to go and squat or run if you've got constipation, we used to think it was because the mechanical forces help with motility. It probably is, but also this BDNF is telling the intestinal muscles to contract and push the fecal matter through. So they found in kids with constipation they had low levels of BDNF in their intestinal cells. So really good adjunct to whatever else you're doing. Hope we're getting that picture. Okay, so we'll just touch upon the last few: antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and detoxifier. So as I mentioned about exercise being like a stimuli and a stressor, this hormetic stressor, exercise causes like an acute energy deficiency in your cells. You know, if you go for a sprint, you obviously can't sprint 400 metres or a kilometre, that you can do it at a 100-metre pace because you run out of energy. And your cells sense this, and they mount a response to try and adapt to this low energy state, this hormetic stress, as we call it. So this has really good beneficial effects on some really important things that are critical these days, such as toxicity, antioxidants, and inflammation. I won't get into the biochemistry, but basically, when your cells sense this energy deficiency from exercise, it switches on certain parts of your genes, your genome, to upregulate the expression of detoxifying enzymes and antioxidant enzymes. So we can eat our fruits and vegetables, we can take the supplements for oxidative protection, but also exercising can make your body's own defense against oxidative stress. Did you hear from Mark Cohen here? Professor Mark Cohen, I think he's in the next room. He's a professor down at Swinburne University. He's the expert on toxicity. He spoke at one of our conferences last year. Actually, he was the first speaker. And he came and he painted this picture on how toxic the world is as we know it. There's PCBs and persistent organic pollutants and bisphenols and everything. It was like everything's covered in toxins. And he frightened the heck out of me. And then he wound up his seminar and said, "Oh, I've got to go." Someone asked, "Oh, so what do I do about it?" And he sort of looked at his watch and said, "Oh, actually, I've got to go to another presentation. I'll just have to leave you with that." And I was scared, like, what? How do we live in this world, this toxic soup? You know, we can do a detox, it's really good, help our liver and use herbs and all that sort of stuff. These couple researchers, Mr. Lee and Jacobs, are probably the world's leaders in looking at the effects of toxicity like plasticizers and so forth, endocrine disruptors, on human health. They're finding a strong link between that and diabetes. Anyway, they published this recent review, and I was quite relieved to read that their view is we need to obviously avoid exposure and improve our sort of regulation of it all. But what we can do as individuals is stimulate these hormetic pathways. One is calorie restriction. Another one's taking phytochemicals like, resveratrol, curcumin, all that sort of stuff. And the third one is creating this energy deficiency in exercise. So think of it as really good insurance for this toxic world that we all have to live in. As a bit of a proof of concept, as they say, mice exposed to PCBs, they develop diabetes like humans do when exposed to PCBs. But they got one group of mice to exercise, and they measured their levels of inflammation, which drives a lot of conditions. Autistic brains have high levels of inflammation with their glial cells and microglia, allergies and asthma, all that sort of stuff, as you know. So their levels of inflammation actually reduced lower than as if they weren't exposed to the PCBs at all. And then, like measuring their blood glucose levels, it prevented that rise in blood glucose, which is a hallmark of diabetes. Again, so when you're out running or stretching or lifting weights, you can think of the benefits outside of just, body composition. So that's covered prebiotic, antioxidant. It increases the production of your own antioxidant enzymes, and it helps detoxify by that hormetic stress, upregulating your own glutathione, your own superoxide dismutase, all these compounds that grab onto toxins and help you eliminate them. Okay, so that's all the cool science, the new stuff. But as we know, the difficulty is actually doing it. I'm a bit like this at the moment with Game of Thrones, watching season 5 and far too much time on the couch. So, back in the 80s, we remember Norm and the couch potato. Things are the same, if not worse. So really, the crux of it is to get ourselves to and our children to exercise. Just catch up. My son, I've got a 9-year-old and a 4-year-old. 9-year-old is really good at AFL and awesome at cricket. Problem is it's on the Xbox 360. There's natural forces in the world like gravity and nuclear forces, and him attracting to that Xbox when you wake up in the morning, he's already there and playing away at it. It's like, So I do have a challenge trying to get him off it, trying to get him to actually play football and cricket and backyard cricket and all that sort of stuff. And there's that, as a parent, and even not being a parent, working in this world, living, working and all that sort of stuff, you want to exercise, but then you feel guilty because there's other things you've got to do. And if you're caring for a child with needs, your whole focus, understandably, is on them. And you often forget about your own health and well-being. And you think, I'll do that later. Or it's not as important as my child. Fortunately, there is some research showing that putting yourself first can actually help your child. So they looked at activity levels in parents and activity levels in children, and they found those parents who were more active, particularly the fathers, the role models, the kids were more active and the kids were leaner. The same data is showing out with body composition and parents. If the dad's fit and healthy, then the kids are typically fit and healthy. So don't feel guilty about going out and doing something. You can do it with the child, or you can take your time out and go to the gym, because there's going to be some sort of flow and benefit. I know it's sort of hard, and my son gives me grief about going to the gym, just when he wants to finally take him outside and play cricket. He gives me grief about it, but you've got to balance it up. So that's the first thing. Don't cut back on your own sort of recreation and activity and sport and exercise. Next, you have to get a bit more sort of creative and proactive. So that report card on the Australian Kids Fund, as I said, we've got the world's best sports programs. However, we're just lagging behind with our commuting to school, or just everyday chores, and that incidental activity. And I've experienced that you take kids to training, and then they do the training, they go home, and they sit around and don't do anything, and you can't get them to take the rubbish out or anything like that. So we need to really think about that incidental activities, commuting to school, or friends, or shops, or so forth. There's Mark. You're scared. It's like, I'll talk to you later. Toxins. Exercise helps with toxicity, doesn't it? What was I saying? So yeah, we've got to get sort of creative and help our kids, get them to help out in the garden, walk into shops and schools and so forth, because the infrastructure's there, the sports and things are there, but we need to do that in addition to that. And even ourselves, you might do your class once a week or something, but we need to just try and get our steps up and our activity levels and that incidental activity. You can't beat them, sort of join them with these apps and Fitbits and all that sort of stuff. Kids really like that. There's different things online, there's the Fitbits and so forth. Anything to get them engaged. And this is one of the strategies with my son and his Xbox, was I got one of those Connect things at Christmas time, where it's pretty cool. It monitors all your movements, and you can play cricket and soccer and gridiron and dodgeball and that sort of stuff. And you really do work up a sweat doing that. So, and they did a study with autistic children playing the Wii Olympics, and they found that it increased their cardiovascular fitness. So a couple of years ago, there was researchers were saying that we've got to limit our kids to 2 hours of screen time a day, whether it's tablets and iPhones and computers and TVs. And then the same researchers published just recently said, forget it, it's just not going to happen in this day and age. You can't stop them. It's in their face, that school and all that sort of stuff. So it's more about accepting it and working with it and finding ways to offset that. So one of the concepts they're talking about now is green time, getting out there, getting active, just getting out in nature in a sense and combating it versus screen time. So we sort of try and do a one-to-one ratio at home where if they do a session of screen time, they've got to do a session of green time. If you get online, there's this sort of like colouring in thing for the kids, and they colour in a TV set if they do some screen time. And then if they go out and do some green time, they can colour in a native Australian animal. And the idea is to fill in the animals before you fill in the TVs, and you can, set a reward for the children, an outing or something if they tip the balance towards green time. Oops, I'm going back. Oops. Okay. So just to wrap, the key point is, get moving. Doesn't have to be specific. Ideally, some sort of moderately vigorous exercise. If we can broaden our mindset from just burning calories and burning fat to having these direct effects on the brain, help with our moods, indirect effects on inflammation and oxidative stress and toxicity, and helping with our gut. And you can see it's like a really broad spectrum treatment. Something you can do on top of whatever you're doing for yourself and for your children. And, children with needs, they're going to benefit just as much, if not more, than, fit and active children. So don't sort of dismiss it as a soft sort of approach for their treatment. I think it's fundamental as diet and supplements and remedial therapies and so forth. Okay, that about does it. So hopefully get out there and give me 20. Thanks.